Hi, my name is Nick Gaumont. I am a music producer based out of Montreal. If you're an independent musician, chances are you're applying to grants. If you are applying to grants, chances are you have to make demos to apply to those grants. And today we're going to answer a question from one such independent musician, Alexi, who asks, if I'm new to a DAW and just want to make demos to apply to things like grant applications or project proposals, what is the most important thing to make my demos sound half decent? The single most important thing you need to focus on in your DAW is really simple. It's just volume. If your track is balanced properly, it will sound like a song. So listen to the genre that you're working in and see what the relative levels of everything are. Try to reference that as you're working on your stuff. All you need to know is how to set volumes and how to automate volume, which is probably the most basic function of any DAW. If your track's volumes are set right, then our ear will kind of forget about the recording quality. But if that were the only thing that I was going to be talking about today, this video would be pretty short. So let me add some more things. So first of all, if you're going to be recording yourself, never tell yourself that you're going to fix it in the mix. If you're new to a DAW, you probably won't be able to. If you're recording actual audio, that means you're going to be getting the best tones possible right out of the microphone if you can, and you're going to be getting the best takes possible because you don't want to edit them later. Now, of course you can, but you should not aim to be spending a lot of time editing anyway. If you want to make this process even easier, then what you can do is focus on using virtual instruments as much as possible. Most DAWs have perfectly fine stock VST instruments. It's easy to swap out sounds later. It's easier to edit too. And since this is just a demo that you're going to be applying for funding with, I think you'll benefit from having the better tones of MIDI instruments. If you're not experienced at recording, you'll just save yourself a lot of time. If you do end up using a lot of MIDI instruments, then you could run into CPU problems. Once you've settled on a good performance and a good sound, then I would bounce the MIDI performance for that instrument down to audio and then delete the MIDI instruments so you can save on CPU, because audio events are much less taxing than real-time MIDI processing. So this will also save you the headache of constantly tweaking sounds and wondering whether they are done or not. So you can just commit to something and then move on, and your computer will thank you later. So the next thing that you're gonna wanna do, and you should be doing this while actually recording if you are recording, is to make sure that nothing is clipping. So this means that nothing is going above 0 dB. Printing stems or printing multi-tracks afterwards, this means that the individual tracks should not be going above 0, because when you do print them and they are going above 0, then they will be clipping. There's really no way of undoing clipping once it's processed. And the same thing goes for the master fader. You definitely will be exporting the master fader, so make sure that it is not going above 0. So now let's say that you finish all your recording and you want to try to make it sound better. Before you start mixing anything, if you have actually recorded stuff with a microphone, I would recommend going out and editing out all the silence and all the parts that the instrument is not playing but there is audio, because if you have a lot of recorded audio tracks, and I'm not talking about the MIDI ones right now, even if it looks like there's just like a couple dB on a track, you might as well get rid of it, because a couple dB across 20 tracks more probably, that's just going to add up and it's not going to be your friend. So now let's get into some of the processing. Now, if you're new to a DAW and all you want to do is like what Alexi wants to do, and that's just submit for funding and project proposals, I would really just try to stick to the volume tip. But if you have a bit of time and this is something that you want to do in the long term anyway, here are some kind of basic processing tips that you can try out the first time. But the caveat to all of these and to pretty much the rest of the list is, when in doubt, it's better to do nothing. Good rule of thumb that I used when I was learning, and I still use today, is if I can't hear it or I'm not sure that it's making anything better, then I will just get rid of it, get rid of the plugin, the process, whatever, don't use it. But one thing that you can do to clear up a lot of space in your mix is to high pass stuff. So this means rolling off a bunch of the lows. So obviously most instruments except for basses, kick drums, toms, any low instruments have low end. You will not do this, but stuff like guitars or voice or like any other non-low end instruments, you can afford to roll off a little bit to give some room to the bass instruments, because even though you can't hear this stuff, the computer can and the plugins can that you might be using. So you'll have some processes that will be reacting to the low end, and some people say that you can just roll off until you start hearing it affecting the sound in a negative way and then reverse from there. It's better to err on the safe side instead of completely butchering your song. So what are you going to use to do this high passing stuff? Well, this is the next tip. Pretty much every DAW these days have more than adequate stock plugins, including the stock channel strip stuff. To this day, I use the basic stock plugins and channel strip stuff in Cubase, and I'm sure in other DAWs kind of up to snuff these days anyway, so just stick to those. You don't have to go digging through plugins and trying to decipher names and stuff. Get familiar with those as much as possible and stick to those as long as possible. Even 4 or 5 years into doing this, I still use stock plugins all the time. Just it's better to know those inside and out before you start buying plugins, because that's a expensive rabbit hole to go down for sure. And then when you're more experienced, you'll know exactly what tools that you're missing, so you'll be able to go find those with ease and be confident in your purchase in the future. When you're using these plugins, a good starting point, if you're not super experienced, is to try the plugin presets, but this does come with a warning. Just keep in mind that these presets were not programmed for your specific situation. These presets pretty much always need to be tweaked, which is totally fine, and I recommend doing that. But again, when in doubt, just don't use anything at all. Don't assume that preset equals good. It's a starting point, and that's it. So next, if you're really feeling adventurous or you're more experienced, then, and let's face it, you're probably, even if you aren't, you're probably going to want to put some reverb and delays on stuff just because it tends to make things sound better, but be careful. As a starting point, I would recommend using reverbs and delays as send effects or auxiliary tracks instead of putting them on individual instruments, because you really want to control what the reverb itself is doing. In most cases, you're gonna probably want to roll off a lot of the lows and the highs and kind of carve out the mids with EQ if you're experienced or up to learning that. And if you put the reverb directly on a track, a lot of reverb plugins don't really allow you to have that much control over the EQ. And so for this reason, you're gonna want to put it on some kind of send track. But like I said before, the most important thing that you should be focusing on is just getting the volume. Volume is far from being the sexiest thing in audio, but that is really the fundamental of everything. Your songs will really suffer if you don't address this skill set and really focus on it for a long time. I thought that just by being aware that volume is so important would kind of solve the problem of my balance issues. So I thought that it didn't take me long to develop this skill set, but now when I listen to stuff that I've done in the past, even probably up to a year ago, I can tell that a lot of the times the balance is off in pretty noticeable ways to my ears now, at least. So this is something that takes a lot more time than you think it will. So the sooner you focus on balance, the better. And this kind of leads into the next point, which is to take breaks. The longer we listen, the less effective we become, and we become desensitized to what we're hearing. This is something that I mentioned in a previous video about, I forget which video, but I mentioned this in a previous video. Taking the time away can allow us to come back with a new first impression of sorts. So this is really when you'll notice that what you thought you were doing that was awesome is probably not, especially in terms of volume. When you come back to it, you'll realize that you are kind of pushing things a bit too much, and there's going to be some elements that are just way too loud. So take breaks. And so my final tip is kind of the fail-safe to this whole recording process is when you're actually done and you've exported it, I like to listen to it while doing something else. Any kind of menial task where you're actually focusing on something else. So like replying to email or mindlessly scrolling if that's what you're into, or just doing anything else where you're actually doing something. You'll be playing this music in the background, and if stuff sticks out to you now when you're not really focusing on it, then you should take note of that and go back and fix it in the mix, because that means that it's really out of whack. And this happens to me now, and it'll probably happen to me for a long time, because like I said, we get kind of used to the things that we hear, but then when we stop focusing in so much on the details and listen to the big picture, that's when we see really what is out of whack. But to reiterate the main point, the most important thing that you should be focusing on is definitely the volume and the balance of tracks. That will probably get you 80% of the way there. So those are my stupid internet opinions on the subject. I hope that answers your question, Alexi, and other people who are looking to learn DAWs to make demos for grant applications and project proposals. If any other people on the internet have their own opinions, stupid or not, to share on the subject, feel free to let me know in the comments. As well, you can leave some questions for further videos. Please like and subscribe to help me grow this channel. My name is Nick Gomo. Goodbye.